by State Representative Lance Clow. And of course, he's one of my two representatives in the state legislature. That means, well, it's a good sized district, but these are based on population numbers. And if you're representing, I don't know, Idaho County, you might have two or three counties because it's more sparsely populated. But if you're in Twin Falls, you may represent a much smaller geographic area, but the numbers are the same, right?
Right. Yeah. And good morning to you too. Yeah, the geographic numbers.
I was going to get to good morning, but
Well, I think you start with a good morning and you move right on. But geographically, you're right. Some legislators are geographically challenged. We all have about 46,000 people at as of the 2010 census. But there's some legislators you can't get from parts of their district to the others by any road. You look at District 23 and you think of Senator Brackett down there. He lives in Three Creek and he represents all the way to the Oregon border. He can't get to any part of his district without leaving his district, driving through Twin Falls County, going through Gooding County, and then Elmore County to get down to Owyhee County and parts of Elmore, and of course, Elmore County. And then he has to leave it again to get to other parts.
There are some critics, of course, of government who criticize everything. They probably think that he should just fly over and parachute in.
Yeah, he's probably tried that, knowing him. He's probably ridden his horse over there.
Comes from a very adventurous family. I bought all the books about their relatives. Let me just say that they were a family that definitely led a very active and colorful life for many, many generations. We want to talk, speaking of colorful things that have happened. You told me some months ago, because people think sometimes that as a state legislature, you're sort of immune to what happens to regular people in their own lives, and home, and in other dealings with government. You were sharing with me, and you drew me a map, in fact, at a meeting some months ago about the backflow when it comes to sprinkler systems. And there was just this subject came up last week at Twin Falls City Council. Do you want to tell people a little bit about your experience?
Yeah, and I'm not immune. I get my flu shot, even though I found out now it's only good for about 10% of the varieties. But if people are not aware of it, most cities are enforcing a rule, most cities in Idaho and probably around the country, to have your backflow device, which is your anti-siphon valve, some people might call it. This is, in many cases, above ground. Now they're putting them below ground, tested every year. And the reason for the test is to protect the municipal water system. And that's one of those things that, well, why wouldn't you want to protect the municipal water system? And we do. But when would that be important? And it would be important if the cities, and I'm in Twin Falls, so the city water in Twin Falls would have a break in the line to which my sprinkler system is connected, and they lose their pressure. And backflow usually means that you're going to siphon water from your sprinkler system back into the city's system because their pressure dropped below your pressure and it starts siphoning back in. And so you have to have both of those situations occur at the same time. And as I mentioned the other day at City Council, in all my years on City Council, which was 18 and a half years, and all my time since, and I don't recall ever before, I know that we've heard of water line breaks. I've never heard of a boil order requirement. Well, I heard of boil order requirements in different situations, but most of the time you never have a boil order. I've never heard of somebody saying, oh, they got sick because of this. And of course, that's what we're trying to avoid. And the reason is you have to have the water line break and a backflow device fail at the same time. And so they have this annual testing requirement. Now, I don't mind testing. I think if we're going to hook our sprinkler systems up to the city water, maybe we should test. But maybe once every 2 or 3 years is better than every year. It's $25 to $35 to have a test done. And I think that's, for the risk involved, it's pretty minimal. And I mean, we can talk about this all day. I've been looking at this. But so I'm looking at it because the reason we do annual testing, bottom line, and this is from talking to the Department of Environmental Quality, who referred me over to the Department of Building Safety, who pointed to the plumbing code, and the plumbing code is like 429 pages long.
That's all.
Yeah, that's all. And there's one, and all these regulations just refer to this document. They don't point to what section there really is important to these regulations. And in there's a reference to an inspection. But when I talk to the people in the know, I say, well, but why annual? Why is it in the plumbing code for annual? And the only answer that they could finally get to was that manufacturers only warranty this piece of equipment for 1 year, and then they recommend an annual inspection thereafter. And I'm wondering who recommended that. It was probably their attorney to protect their liability in case it fails, and or their marketing department who wants to sell parts and or replacements. Um, and I don't think it was based on a scientifically based risk reward analysis of the risk. So I'm going to be looking at this year, see if we can look at that section of code and change it to some phrase like not more than 3 years.
There is some concern that a lot of people are happy with it, though, because they're making a lot of money doing the inspections.
Yeah, and I mentioned this at City Council. I says the bad part about this is that we've gotten to the point where when they first implemented, I didn't mention this, but they know this. When they first implemented their backflow testing requirements, there wasn't enough people in town to do the testing, and so they basically said, okay, well, this was a bad year to do it. So the next year, people were upgrading. Now I think they have a list of maybe 50 people that can do this testing, and the guy that tested mine this year, he had to invest, to take the training, the licensing, and buying the backflow testing equipment, etc. And I don't know how much. I thought he said to me he's got over $3,000 invested, and he can still continue to do this testing. But and I'm sorry that we created an industry by a regulation, and that we might have to back off in order to make the consumer a little more reasonable. We had to deal with the arsenic problem, and that was another regulation that was not very well scientifically backed up. When we dealt with the arsenic problem, the city ended up spending 25, $30 million, and they added $15 for the water bills. Well, this is costing everybody 25 to $30 forever. At least the arsenic problem, the major cost, is going to go away in maybe 8 or 9 years.
And part of this issue is that the way these regulations have been changed and the like is that the level, the height of your system. You may have to change that, which may mean a lot of people out there, if they want to have green grass this summer, are going to have to go out and buy something else new. Not just the testing; they've got to pay for the testing, but they've got to go out and buy some new equipment for their sprinkler system.
Yeah, if you have a sprinkler head that is higher than is higher than your backflow device. Now, the ones that are buried, this is not a problem with, and I think the newer systems, I think most of them bury now. But the ones that are above ground, and it looks like a U with this little device on top, if it's not 1 foot higher than the highest sprinkler head on your property, they want you to raise that because they won't even test. This is where you get into these funky rules, and the testers can't test or they'll lose their license if they look at a system and they say it was installed incorrectly. And when they came to my house, I wanted them to test my device so I knew that if I wanted to bury it, it was one cost. If I wanted to raise it, I wouldn't have to buy a new device. And I was willing to bury it, but I didn't want it sticking out of my property 4 or 5 feet. And the reason was because I have a couple of risers in the backyard and a couple in the front yard that are about equal in height or higher than the backflow device. And so they said, okay, now you're going to have to raise this up, and then we'll test it. And I said, well, I don't want you to raise it up, connect it all together, and test it and say, oh, your device is failing. And now you got to buy a new device, because I would have buried with a different device.
You think is there a way around this? Could people just grab a hose and decide that at 8 o'clock every night in the summer they're going to go out and take the old garden hose and just water the yard, and then, or would that cause some issues too?
No, I think, yeah, if you're going to water with your garden hose, that's fine. In fact, my last comments to the city council says, if we get this all resolved, they can all come over to my house and we'll have a nice drink out of my garden hose, which we all survived as kids, but now it's like some evil thing. And I also mentioned that what is the risk of this happening versus someone down in Durkee's Lake swimming and gulping down some of that water? People do this all the time. You don't hear about any major. What about the Snake River? Which is not pristine, clean water. People live around these situations every day, and yet we're worried about that one instance where the city water line breaks and they might siphon it back. And if it did happen, they can test the water, and they can order a boil order for that neighborhood if they had to, instead of spending, it's going to cost people maybe $250,000 a year for all the citizens to do this.
State Representative Lance Clow is in studio with us. It's 9:16. It's 22. Bill Colley with you as well on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Telephone number 208-736-0300. We have a caller with us. Caller, you're up next. You're on the air.
Good morning, Bill. Excellent show as always. I moved from that state over to the west of us, and one of the reasons why I moved was the amount of regulations they impose on the homeowners. In the city I was at, they required 2 backflow preventers, one coming off your city where it turns into your property, another one for irrigation, and it had to be tested. And over there we paid, I think it came out to $25, $30 a year per backflow preventer. It's just ridiculous. It takes some common sense, but at the same time, you have to look at these installers who are putting these systems in. And sometimes I think, I don't know what the hell they're thinking, but it makes things a whole lot difficult sometimes when a system is put in poorly. Now, you mentioned the fact we get all water by hose, but I mean, it's pretty obvious that if you have a well-designed system, it's more efficient and you use less water than a garden hose. But hell of a subject, and you have a great day, Bill.
Thank you. So you're not the only person noticing this.
Right.
We have another caller with us. Caller, you're up next. You're on KLIX. Go ahead. Good morning, caller. You're on the air. We may have lost our caller. I'll give the telephone number out one more time, 208-736-0300. That's 208-736-0300. We've got about a minute before the break. Did you get a lot of sympathy from the council?
A little bit. They felt their backs were up against the wall because the Department of Environmental Quality has their rules, and it, like I said, filters down to this one section of the plumbing code. And there's risks. When I say risk, sometimes they need to get grants or different things, and if they don't follow the real fine rules, they may not be eligible for certain types of funding. For example, when they do major repairs like the arsenic system, if I recall correctly, there was some, maybe it wasn't through the state, but there are opportunities to borrow money from the state to the EPA. They have a loan fund to help cities and counties deal with issues. And you may not qualify if you don't have in place these programs.
We've got to take a short break. We'll take more of your calls following the break. State Representative Lance Clow is in the studio with us this morning, and we're also going to get to some other issues about the upcoming legislative session during the course of the hour. It's 20 minutes after 9 o'clock. Going to warm up today into the upper 30s tomorrow, maybe 45, even warmer in some spots. We're looking forward to a little bit of meltdown. State Representative Lance Clow joining us in the studio this morning. We're at 9:21. It's 24. Bill Colley with you on Top Story as well on News Radio 1310, KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Question or comment for the state representative? 208-736-0300. That's 208-736-0300. And, of course, state legislative session begins under 2 weeks. It's about 11 days away, if I'm correct.
Well, I didn't count the days, but I'm worried about them.
Yes. A lot of travel back and forth.
Yeah.
Hey, speaking of that, we were just talking off air briefly. We might as well use this as a jumping off point about this has come up before when I've had law enforcement in studio. We had a conversation about it about a year ago at Pizza Pie Cafe, of all places. We got talking about when you're on the interstate, the traffic tie-ups you get because you've got the trucks at 70, you've got the rest of the motorists at 80, and then some of the trucks have governors on them, and their speeds are limited to below 70. So this whole idea didn't really mesh as well as people may have thought it would in the beginning.
Well, yeah, I wasn't around when that law was changed with the 80-70. Actually, I was involved with the 80, and they just kind of left the trucks at 70. And the challenge is that you have the 80-mile-an-hour vehicles zooming along. They see trucks up ahead. They move into the fast lane if they're not already in the center lane. And then the truck wants to get around the slow-moving truck, especially as they approach a hill. And all of a sudden, cars are backing up and getting road rage, if you want to call it that. Not that I've ever had road rage. But, because a truck is just creeping along a foot every 30 seconds or so to pass this other vehicle, and everyone's getting upset. And Wyoming has a nice, simple little law that basically says you can't impede traffic that's moving along at a legal speed limit if you are in that center lane. And I'm simplifying the statement, but it's really only a 2 or 3 sentence law. So I passed it around to the ISP, Idaho State Police, and the AAA Auto Club, and both of them think that this is probably an improvement of safety rather than
Hmm.
any problems. And I don't know if it'll solve problems, but if trucks in Wyoming that are coming to Idaho follow that rule, they can follow it over here too.
I noticed. I was telling you during the break that when I drive down to Ogden or Salt Lake City, when you get past, I guess it's probably Snowville, all of a sudden within about 15, 20 miles, the speed limit is uniform at 75 for everyone. And it seems traffic moves a little bit better there too at that uniform speed. I don't know. I can't say, when you get into the northern part of Utah, I can't say that because it's so wide open. You don't really have many traffic issues. And I've driven that stretch from Snowville all the way up to Burley, and I'm maybe all alone some days. But it seems that some people have done some experimentation with this in other places, Wyoming, you mentioned, and that we can actually learn sometimes, not always, but we can learn sometimes from other states.
And what's the statute of limitations on speeding? I was going to say, before we changed all the limits up to 80, I quite often would go, this concept of 2 or 3 miles an hour over the speed limit. Now that's 80, I feel very comfortable staying right there. Very
Right,
comfortable.
right.
But I know when they were passing it, the trucking industry, some of them were concerned about the fact that not all trucks will go 80, and if we set it at 70, some of you're going to have problems with slower trucks than 70, and no way for a legal pass by a truck to get around them. And so we have created a little bit of the problem with the split speed limit. And I'm not trying to go there because I think it's a bigger question than just saying if you're going to pass, make sure that you have time to pass safely.
We have a caller with us. Caller, you're up next. You're on the air with Representative Clow. Go ahead.
Oh, good morning, gentlemen.
Good morning.
Ever since they've upped the speed limit to 80 miles an hour, I have been uncomfortable on the freeway. I do not like to drive that fast. 65 or 70 is plenty to get me anywhere I want to go, and I'm comfortable. I don't use as much gas. It's easier on my vehicle, and I don't like that fast speed, and I don't like to be imposed that I have to drive fast. But you back up traffic if you don't, and then they all, like you say, it's not good to back up traffic. I think that's too fast.
Well, I respect that opinion, and if you want to drive 68, 70, you can stay in the right lane.
Right.
And then only when you get to one of those trucks that's slowing you down and you want to pass, you just need to make sure when you move over that you get around the truck safely. And that's the only thing we're talking about here. But I understand. I know people that don't like to drive above 65 or 70. And as far as gas consumption, I know that we had an experience a few years back when we were driving and we had to go through Oregon. And Oregon speed limits are like 55 or 60 in a lot of their, not the interstate, but on the main roads. And I was surprised how much better my gas mileage was than going 75 to 80. So I understand those concerns and I respect that. I'm not looking at that. I'm not on the traffic committee at the legislature, but I've had a couple of things. This will be the second thing I've brought to them in 2 years. So.
We have another caller. Caller, you're up next. You're on the air at 928 on Top Story.
Good morning. And as an ex-truck driver, I'd like to say, don't make us all stay in the right-hand lane and follow behind those slow-motion company rigs. That's not right, because we're out there making a living, or I was, I guess, but out there making a living, and it's our way of life to get places and on time and as fast as we can get there.
Well, I think he's got a good point.
Yeah, and I've been concerned with that because, obviously transportation is one of the strengths of our country. It's the backbone of what makes us get our goods around the country. And I agree with that. This law, all it would say is when you're in that, normally trucks are supposed to stay in the right lane or not in the fast lane anyway. And when they go to pass, just make sure that when you move over there, you have adequate time to get around without creating a backlog of cars behind you. That's basically all this is. It's pretty simple. So don't impede the traffic behind you that's going at their legal speed too. So I understand, and I have that as a concern, and I figure that will come up if we bring this towards a hearing.
We've only got about 40 seconds before the break, but I'll squeeze a caller in, and then we can get to the response after the other side of the commercial break. Caller, you're up next. You're on the air.
Well, good morning. Hey, I am a truck driver, and I do go across Utah and Wyoming all the time, and their speed limit is 80 miles an hour. And I like that because, it gives you a chance to get somewhere from nowhere. And I don't drive 80 miles an hour in a truck, but I am very comfortable at 75, and traffic seems to flow pretty good until you hit these trucks these big company trucks that are governed at 63 and 65. And there's where the problem comes in, is you get 265-mile-an-hour trucks trying to drag race down the freeway, and it takes forever for anybody to get around anybody else.
Well, I want to thank him for the call. I have to admit, I used to go out on the road with one of my uncles when I was young, and he referenced drag racing. I was actually in the passenger seat sometimes when that took place, and I mean, it was literally a drag race. 9:30 right now. It's 23. State Representative Lance Clow in studio with us for the hour this morning, and we can join us at 9:33 or so in just a few minutes. We'll pick this conversation up. Joining us in the studio this hour of the program is State Representative Lance Clow. It's coming up on 9:34. We're at 25. Bill Colley with you as well on Top Story. I'll be answering the telephones. Telephone number 208-736-0300. We're going to transition over to education issues in just a couple of minutes, but we'll take another telephone call. I think it's related to the roads and the speed limit issues. Caller, you're up next. You're on the air.
Good morning, gentlemen. Hey, this is for Lance. I was just wondering, instead of creating so many more new regulations for trucks, since we're already dealing with the electronic log mandates and all the stuff that goes with that, as far as the speed limit goes, it's totally legal to pass at 65 miles an hour if they're passing at 65 and 63. Yeah, it imposes the cars, but that's the legal speed limit. So why don't we do away with the truck speed limit? Why don't you introduce a bill that favors the trucks, do away with it, and let us drive the speed limit that everybody else gets to drive?
Well, it's a good question. We kind of addressed it earlier. It's not something that I've studied, and I know that when they set up the 80/70, part of it was the fact that they didn't want trucks passing all these trucks that are in governors. So if you can go 80 and all these trucks, there'd be a lot more movement of trucks getting around the other trucks, and I think that was their fear. I was just in Tennessee a few weeks back, and I was driving on the interstate in the early evenings, and I couldn't believe the truck traffic on that road. I think I-65, I think. It was unbelievable, the amount of trucks, and they were everywhere. And I kept they did not have a differential speed limit, but it's not like driving from here to Boise. I mean, the amount of traffic was unbelievable for about 150 miles that I drove. And I kept wondering, I wonder what the speed limits are here and the passing rules. But I don't want more regulations. This, I think, is a very simple, common sense thing. Says just don't impede traffic. You're going to make the pass, make the pass. And like I said, the problem with the 80 for trucks is that there are too many trucks that are limited to 68 or whatever their governors are set at for fuel efficiency. And so now you're going to have trucks passing every other truck.
I want to thank you for the call. We have a bit of a disparity versus the eastern states. When I was living in upstate New York, the speed limit, it was a big deal when it went from 55 to 65. And I don't think it's changed. I think that, but then again, you have communities that are so close together. When you're in the Intermountain West, 80 miles per hour, if you had to go 65 or 55 everywhere, you'd be traveling for days sometimes. And so this is because of the vast distances we have here. That's why we have 80 mile per hour speed limits.
Right. One of the things I was talking with some representatives from Indiana, and they were talking about I'm out in rural Indiana. I says, you don't know what rural is. I said, you can. Indiana was flattened by a glacier. You can drive almost anywhere. You ought to be in some of our districts where it takes 6 hours to get from one side of your district to the other.
Yeah.
But it might be only 50 miles.
We have another caller with us. Caller, you're up next. You're on the air with State Representative Lance Clow.
Hello, how you doing?
Good.
You guys referenced Utah. If you actually drove in Utah very much, do you notice that you don't get the truck pile or the side by side as much as you do in Idaho. But instead of regulating them, the guy that's trying to pass, because if you've ever drove a truck, you know when you're trying to pass them, especially if you're doing about the same speed, and sometimes you can just sit there and pull that truck that you're trying to pass along with you. So it'd make more sense if you're going to regulate anything to make the guy in the right-hand lane that's being passed by a truck that's governed the same as him to slow down and let him get over. Because I mean, you're trying to tell a guy that's passing another guy that he better make sure that he's got enough room. Well, the way Idaho's growing and as much traffic he's got out there, you can't do that. I mean, so you're going to have him not passing, and then you're going to have miles and miles of trucks behind each other.
Well, I want to thank him for the call. I am one of those people, when I'm being passed, I often take my foot off the gas or slow down or take at least some of the pressure off it to allow the person to get around me a little bit more quickly.
Yeah. I'm always fascinated with people that are in a hurry, and I'm usually trying right at that speed limit close to 80, and I'm going along and I'm getting ready and I'm moving along. But if someone gets on my bumper and they want me to pull over, but if I pull over, there's a truck there in that right lane and I'm going to be backed up behind that truck in a few seconds.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'm always amazed how they try to get around me, and then they can't because there's no time, I think what we're talking about is common courtesy, common sense, if there is such a thing. And that's difficult to regulate. But I agree. It'd be nice if the trucks backed off a little, but I think those trucks don't want to back off because to get back up to speed, it uses more fuel. And
they have timetables, too, that they've got to keep.
Right.
And I know that from my own experiences. In this day and age, they have the GPS system. Everyone knows where they are back at the office, and they've got a timetable they've got to meet. We've got more coming up in just a few minutes with State Representative Lance Clow. We're going to talk a little bit about some of the education issues coming up in the legislative session as well. We're at 9:40. It's 22 right now. Bill Colley with you as well on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. And wanted to point out tomorrow temperatures in some areas might be a stretch, but could get near 50 degrees. Our guest in the studio is State Representative Lance Clow, joining us this morning on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Top Story with Bill Colley. We're officially at the studio. We're at 22. Big issues coming up. 2/3 of this state budget every year, and it varies a little bit, I'm sure, here and there, but it's about education. It's about Idaho schools and colleges, and in fact, there's often a tug of war between higher education and public education that takes place during the budget hearings, during the course and the lobbying that goes on during the course of session. I heard the leader from the state Senate's education committee a few weeks ago. He's running for lieutenant governor, but he got into some depth on these issues while he was giving a presentation here at Kiwanis. And I was mightily impressed by just some of the figures and things that he was citing. And he pointed out, he said, it's a committee no one else wants an assignment on, which is why he ended up choosing it. But I can't understand that because it is such a huge responsibility for state government.
Yeah, well, education does account for about 60% of the budget, and about 50% is K-12 public education. The balance is higher ed, everything from community colleges to our universities. And it isn't important. I've been on the education committee since I went up there. I debated on what committees do I want to get on, and people did say that education is a lot of work, and it is. But I decided at the time it was one of the most important issues coming out. I was elected in 2012. They just had the props defeated, so there was going to be major changes, and I wanted to be part of that change. But there's a lot going on in education. This year, one of the interesting things was they had an interim committee to look at the school funding formula. And think of a formula that's 2 pages long, and they give that to you on the SATs. Nobody would get to college.
Yeah.
But this formula includes all sorts of things, how money is distributed from how much does Ada County, or I should say West Ada School District receive versus what does Castleford receive. And the formula has to account for size and all sorts of different factors. And we have a very complicated formula because it's evolved. I'm not sure it's a bad formula, but I understand the issues. So one of the things that we hear quite often at conferences that I go to, and I hear this from the teachers themselves, and especially superintendents, is we should get away from an attendance-based formula and go to an enrollment-based. And think about this, at the beginning of the year, teacher shows up and they say, you're going to have 30 kids in your class. And I'm just making up a number, folks. I'm not trying to disturb, but they say 30 people in your class. And so the teacher says, oh, I need 30 desks out here. So they put in 30 desks. And then they go through the motions. And then, on the second day, a couple kids are absent. And then a flu season comes along and whatever. And they end up averaging 27 kids. Well, the formula says, oh, okay, we fund 27 kids. We don't fund 30. Yet the school district had to hire based upon how many seats were needed. And so there's a lot of argument why we should go to an enrollment-based formula rather than attendance. And schools work very hard to get their kids to school every day because the higher the attendance, the more funding they get. Imagine they would be recruiting more for enrollment if it was the other way around. But my fear is that we'll switch to an enrollment-based formula instead of getting X dollars per seated student, you're going to get slightly less per enrolled student, and then everyone's going to say, oh, that didn't work out the way we hoped. Really, what they want is more money, and we probably do need to put more money in the seats.
When we talk about some of the challenges that are faced, and I keep hearing this, and I went to the governor's Capitol for a day in Hanson this past spring, and he addressed the teacher salary issue. A lot of people out there may say, oh, I think they make enough money, but we have to realize that just because of the geography of our state, we have a lot of neighbors who are paying a lot more money for teachers. And so retention becomes important because you almost need institutional knowledge as a teacher any longer. And I spoke to Representative Bell yesterday, and I mentioned that I had heard some of the merit pay was slowed. It hasn't been paid out. And she said that will speed up. But there's an effort to try to figure out a way, how do we keep these people here so they don't bolt for Washington State or Oregon?
It's always going to be a challenge when you compare dollars. You think of the police department in Twin Falls, they're always competing against the police department in Ada County, City, Boise, Ada County sheriffs, because they pay more. They have a higher cost of living. They need more. They're constantly hiring. And so there's always that type of a challenge. The starting salary for teachers when I came into the legislature was around $32,000 and some dollars, and now I think it's up to $34,000. But the person that started in 2013, I want to say 2015, I think that's when we first installed the ladder. They're up over $40,000 now, or right now they'd be up close to $40,000. And the way the ladder works is the first 2 or 3 years, you see some fairly substantial increases if you're progressing and learning the job. And after about 5 years, someone that was making, let's say originally 35, they're probably making 42 to 43 after 5 years. Now, what the ladder did not do, it did not address all the teachers that had been there for 15 and 20 years, because they kind of got dropped into the one part of the ladder that says you already paid quite a bit, and I'm not trying to say that's a true statement, but I mean, you already paid quite a bit. We're going to have to address that. Now, the merit pay, a lot of the merit pay issues is that to move from one year to the next and get the next salary increase, you're supposed to be making progress and showing that your students are making progress. And that part of the system has been weak at the best. It's been weak. So they are addressing that. We've put in leadership premiums to pay for hard to fill positions. It's there to actually pay certain teachers premiums to do different things in the school, to help more difficult students, help other teachers, mentor, a whole variety of things. And so there are some other money out there, and it's being spent. I don't think there's any dollars left in education that isn't getting spent just because they haven't figured out a way to do it.
Well, you referenced the cost of living. Calendar year 2016, I got approached twice by a company about going to Modesto, California, and I would have hosted a radio program in Modesto and in Stockton. And immediately, from a broadcaster's perspective, you go, wow, my audience will be a lot larger if I'm on in those two cities. And in February, the temperatures are in the 70s. And then they told me what the job would pay, and it was roughly the same as what I was making here. And then I looked at what it cost when it comes to taxes in California and groceries in California and utilities in California. And I suddenly realized I'd have to get a second job in order to make this move. So, from a standpoint of a teacher, it might look good to see what they're paying in Washington State or Nevada, but you've got to ask yourself, what's it going to cost me to commute, taxes, etc.
Yeah. And we also, I think, have to look at what is the funding formulas or funding methods for other states. Like Wyoming pays quite a bit more, but they have natural energy. Now, some of that, the price has been going down, but it's not based upon income taxes and sales taxes like we have. We have a very balanced system, but we're not getting the natural resource revenues that like Wyoming is. And so it's been a little easier for them to fund that. But even in Wyoming, they want to attract teachers, but they're going after the more experienced teachers. And so many teachers in Idaho that have an experience have gone to Wyoming. Some of them have come back. They're having some financial issues in Wyoming, and as we saw recently in a report, Wyoming's losing population, where Idaho is the fastest, at least the most recent analysis, growing state in the country.
9:51. We wanted to mention State Representative Lance Clow is in studio with us. We're at 24. Bill Colley as well on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Telephone number for our program is 208-736-0300. That's 208-736-0300. The Washington Post had a theory. A writer said the other day that Wyoming is losing that population because the industry there is mainly coal. He said Idaho has a much more diversified economy, and that is because we were forced to do it decades ago when a lot of the mines closed. So even though you would look at the two states and you would drive through the two states, you might see a lot of similarities. That we are ahead of the game in that sense, that we have a lot more opportunity here than there.
Yeah, I mean, most of our mining and things was for precious metals, and that's pretty limited on what you can do. Whereas the energy sector in Wyoming is tremendous. They got the natural gas and the coal. So energy sector, I think, is a better way to say it, just the mining. And it is. They have some of the largest coal fields in the country, but the price of coal's gone down. There's with the amount of natural gas that's come online and the concept to try and be a little cleaner in our environment, natural gas has been used a lot more in power plants of late, the newer power plants, than coal. So coal has been on the outs for a while, and I feel bad for that. And I think a lot of the regulations have been unwarranted on the coal industry, and we'll see a rebound in that. I think the industry knows how to react, and I think our coal-fired plants are much cleaner than most of them around the world. And not saying that they're perfect, but we'll deal with it.
Growth here has been a lot faster than anyone really expected it to be. There were all these projections, even in the Twin Falls area, that I saw the quote, Travis Rothweiler was surprised we got there so quickly. We got there about 5 years sooner with a metropolitan designation than anyone expected it would happen. Now, there are people obviously who are uncomfortable with rapid growth. It doesn't mean it's going to always be here, but challenges they're not always bad things. But do we need to stand back and maybe take a better look at the growth and better manage it? Or I don't want to say regulate it, because we don't regulate a lot in this state. But are there things that we should start considering now that maybe we haven't?
Well, growth is a difficult thing to manage, as you've mentioned. Think about why do people want to move here? Maybe it's economic opportunity. Maybe it's they're going to retire and it's lower cost of living. Maybe it's because of the mountains that we have. People are moving here for a variety of reasons. And where they're leaving is because of a variety of reasons. And I've always said that you have to maintain what you have to keep all your current citizens happy. And if they're happy, then people are going to come to town and they're going, hey, this is a nice place. I ought to consider moving here. So a lot of people have moved to the West because of weather. People moved to Arizona originally because they had asthma and there wasn't any pollens in the air. Now they've got as big a problem as anybody else. But people move in different places around the country for weather conditions and a variety of things. Uh, you can't put a sign at the border. I think Oregon tried it. You can't put a sign at the border that says "Stay home, don't move here." Come and spend your money, but don't live here. If you have a nice community, people that travel, they're going to notice. And if they're unhappy with the situations at home, they're going to start looking around. And I think that's what's happening in Idaho, is people are just saying that there's economic opportunity, the taxes are balanced, the cost of living is reasonable, and they're moving. I think there's a lot of retirees moving here. We need to get a lot more eligible workers.
Now, I heard one time from Chris Talkington was on the show with us about a year ago, and I think he said that the projections the city had made long, long ago was that the growth would all happen on the south side. And then, of course, it just boomed on the north and the west sides, and to a lesser extent the east side. But it shows you the difficulty of trying to look into that crystal ball and say, okay, what's going to happen? Because it's like anything in your life. I mean, you can say, this is where I want to be in 5 years. I'm always shocked where I'm at. And so the only thing I knew about Twin Falls, Idaho before I moved here was I would see a label on a yogurt container. And so, you don't know what's coming around the corner. And so to say, can we prepare for it? Sometimes you just can't.
Yeah, it is a challenge, and you cannot just tell people not to move here. Around the country, people, oh, you're the potato state, or how is it there in Iowa? It's always amazing how people don't really know much about Idaho, but we are a unique state, and a special state, and people are recognizing that, and they're moving here. Boise State University is probably, because their football program has brought a lot of attention to Idaho.
Everyone knows the blue field.
Yeah, it's just like the Rose Bowl has brought a lot of people to California in the past, because for some reason or other on January 1st, it's always a bluebird day in Southern California. And everybody thinks every day is like that there's never any smog or fog or anything.
Well, when we talk a little bit about that reputation of the state, that's the other part of it. How do we market ourselves? Because we are a huge dairy state. People tend not to think about that around the country, but for those people, we always have to be thinking, how can we better help them sell their products?
Yeah. Well, I think that Idaho, I think we do a pretty good job. I know when Chobani was looking to come to Twin Falls, and I was still on city council, and we took them around. They got so excited, their search team and the president of the company. We took them out to the canyon by the visitor center, before the new visitor center. We took them out there, and they were looking into the canyon, and we couldn't get them away. They were taking all these selfies and all these photos. I was sure it was going to end up on their label. So it's an interesting phenomenon we have. And I'll tell you, one of the things that will limit growth, what'll limit growth probably for Twin Falls is water.
Mm-hmm.
And how we can manage the water. And right now, the city's made some tremendously good decisions in the last 20 years on the water, and we have good water. And then, of course, wastewater rules. Those are things that can limit growth, and that's no water, no people.
Right, as they've discovered in some other parts of the country. We want to thank you for coming by today. The hour just flew by as well. We may be talking to you during the course of session at some point.
Oh, give me a call.
I know that you have the committee meetings and all of that, but if you ever get a few minutes. Lance Clow joining us in studio this morning. He's a state representative from right here in Twin Falls. We're at 26. Bill Cowley as well on Top Story. Tomorrow morning, we're going to be joined by State Senator Jim Patrick. We're also talking firearms in hour number 2 of the program. Fox News is next at 10 o'clock, and God willing, if the creek don't rise, they'll let me come back and do this all over again tomorrow morning.